He locked the door before I even realized we were standing in front of it. The key trembled in his hand. Just slightly. Just enough for me to notice. "Daniel?" I asked, forcing a smile. "Why does your house have a door that needs 3 locks?" He didn't answer. And that was the first moment I felt it. The thin crack forming inside something I thought was unbreakable. I married him for love, not for money, not for status, not because he was mysterious or charming in that calculated way some men are. I married him because when he looked at me, I felt chosen, safe, seen. But love doesn't prepare you for the sound of metal sliding into place between you and the truth. If you believe love can survive secrets, stay with me until the end. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels. It started only 2 weeks after the wedding. We had just moved into his house, a large, old property on the edge of town. He'd inherited it, he said, from an uncle who had no children. The place was beautiful in a quiet, heavy way. High ceilings, long hallways, doors that led to rooms I still hadn't memorized. I told myself the unease was just adjustment. The first strange thing was simple. He never let me clean the basement. Not, "Don't worry about it," not, "I'll handle it." It was firm. "I'll take care of downstairs," he said the first Saturday morning when I picked up a mop. His tone was gentle but final. Downstairs. He didn't say basement. That same night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Slow, measured. Not pacing, not random, intentional. I turned toward his side of the bed. Empty. The clock on the nightstand glowed 2:17 a.m. I lay still, listening. The house carried sound in strange ways. The steps weren't above me. They weren't outside. They were below. I told myself he couldn't sleep. Maybe he was organizing boxes. Maybe grief for his uncle hit him at night. When he returned, his skin felt cold when he slid back under the sheets. "Were you downstairs?" I whispered. He paused. "Just checking something." "What?" "Nothing you need to worry about." Nothing you need to worry about. The sentence settled into me like dust. Over the next few days, patterns emerged. He kept a specific key on a separate ring in his pocket. He never left it unattended. When he showered, it sat on the counter within arm's reach. When he slept, it rested inside the drawer of his nightstand. I tested him once, casually, lightly. "What does that key open?" "Storage." "Can I see?" He kissed my forehead. "It's a mess down there. You'd hate it." I laughed. "I married you. I think I can handle a messy room." His smile didn't reach his eyes. One afternoon, while he was out buying groceries, I heard it. A faint hum. Low, electrical, coming from beneath the floor. I froze in the kitchen. The house was old. Old houses creak. They settle. They breathe. They don't hum. I knelt and pressed my ear against the wooden boards. There it was again. Steady. Mechanical. My chest tightened. I stood up too quickly and nearly knocked over a chair. I walked to the basement door at the end of the hallway. It was heavier than the others, reinforced, and locked. 3 locks. I stared at them. What kind of inherited storage needs that level of protection? My heart pounded so loudly I thought someone might hear it, but I was alone. That night at dinner, I watched him differently. The way he cut his steak, calm, precise. The way he avoided looking at the hallway when a pipe knocked somewhere in the walls. "Daniel?" I said carefully. "Did your uncle work from home?" He blinked. "Why?" "The wiring. I heard something earlier." He held my gaze for a long second. "You're not used to the house yet. It makes noises." It sounded like machinery. His jaw tightened. I said, "It's nothing." The temperature at the table dropped. I realized something then. It wasn't the house that felt unfamiliar. It was him. The next morning, he left earlier than usual. And this time, he forgot something. The key. It was sitting on the dresser, not hidden, not locked away, just there, waiting. I stood in the bedroom doorway for a full minute, staring at it. My pulse roared in my ears. Love tells you to trust. Instinct tells you to survive. I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected. And when I walked down that hallway toward the reinforced door, each step felt like it was splitting my life into two versions. The woman who believed her husband, and the woman about to find out who he really was. The metal was cold against my palm as I slid the first lock open, then the second, then the third. The door creaked inward, releasing a breath of air that smelled nothing like dust or storage. It smelled clean, sterile, controlled, and the humming grew louder. I stepped inside. The staircase descended into white light, not the yellow dimness of a basement bulb. White, bright, intentional. My fingers trembled against the railing as I walked down. Each step echoed. At the bottom, I turned the corner, and what I saw made my knees nearly give out. Because this wasn't storage. This wasn't grief. This wasn't inheritance. This was something he built, and he never meant for me to see it. The room was spotless. Not the kind of clean you get from organizing old boxes. This was controlled, deliberate. The air felt filtered. The walls were painted white. Bright overhead lights hummed softly, casting sharp shadows across metal tables. And in the center of the room stood a hospital bed. Not old, not dusty, not abandoned. New. My breath caught in my throat. There were cabinets along the far wall, all labeled in neat black lettering. Files stacked with precision. A rolling tray with medical instruments laid out as if someone had just stepped away for a moment. This wasn't storage. This wasn't a forgotten relic from an eccentric uncle. This was active. I took a step forward, my shoes squeaking faintly against the polished concrete floor. "Daniel?" I whispered into the empty space, even though I knew he wasn't there. The hum was coming from a tall machine near the bed, tubes coiled neatly beside it. A small monitor flickered with a green standby light. My heart was pounding so hard I felt dizzy. Why would my husband have something like this hidden beneath our home? I moved toward the cabinets. My fingers hesitated before touching the first drawer. It slid open smoothly. Inside were medical gloves, masks, sealed syringes. My stomach dropped. Daniel wasn't a doctor. He worked in finance. I stepped back as if the drawer might burn me. This wasn't just strange. This was deliberate deception. On the wall to the right, there was another door. Smaller, steel, locked. Different lock, not the same key. The realization sent a wave of cold through me. Whatever this room was, it wasn't the final layer. I walked slowly around the bed. The sheets were folded tight, corners crisp. And then I saw it. Strapped to the side rail, not restraints, but leather cuffs. My vision blurred for a second. This couldn't be what it looked like. It couldn't. I tried to breathe slowly, but panic was creeping in, quiet and methodical. There were no signs of blood, no stains, No signs of violence. Everything looked prepared, not used. That somehow felt worse. On the metal desk near the monitor, there was a folder. Plain. My name written across the front, in his handwriting. The room tilted. I stared at it for several seconds, hoping my eyes were playing tricks on me. They weren't. My name, carefully written. I stepped closer. My fingers felt numb as I reached for it. Inside were printed pages, charts, schedules, dates. My chest tightened as I scanned the first page. It listed my routine. When I woke up, when I showered, when I left for work, when I returned. Even the nights I couldn't sleep. Every movement documented. I swallowed hard. This wasn't love. This was surveillance. My hands began to shake so violently, the papers rattled. On the second page, there were notes. Subject displays high emotional attachment. Trust level, stable. Intervention window, optimal after 90 days of marriage. I couldn't breathe. Subject. Not wife, not Emma. Subject. A sound behind me made my entire body freeze. A faint click, like metal settling. I turned slowly toward the staircase. No one. Silence. But I wasn't alone anymore. Not in the way I had been. Because now I knew. The man I married had been studying me, planning something, timing something, and I was standing in the center of it. My mind raced. 90 days. We'd been married 14. Was this preparation? For what? My thoughts spiraled until one detail sliced through the panic. The dates on the schedule didn't stop at 90. They extended further. Much further. With check marks beside future weeks, future months. He had a timeline, and I was on it. A wave of nausea forced me to sit on the edge of the hospital bed. The mattress dipped under my weight. The hum of the machine grew louder in my ears. I stared at the steel door again. Locked. What was behind it? Another room? Another secret? Or something waiting? I stood up abruptly. I shouldn't be here. If he came home and found me, my heart slammed against my ribs. The key. I still had it in my hand. I rushed toward the stairs, flipping off the main light switch as I climbed. The brightness cut instantly, leaving only a dim emergency glow behind me. At the top, I pulled the door closed and locked each latch carefully, exactly as I found them. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to slide the final lock into place. I placed the key back on the dresser upstairs exactly where it had been. I stood in the bedroom, staring at it. Nothing had changed. The house was quiet, ordinary, safe, but the illusion was gone. When Daniel came home that afternoon, he kissed me the same way he always did. Soft. Familiar. "Hey," he said. "How was your day?" I looked at him. Really looked at him. At the steady calm in his eyes, at the warmth in his voice. And for the first time since I met him, I felt afraid to answer. "It was fine," I said. The word felt fragile in my mouth. He studied me for half a second longer than usual. Not suspicious, not accusing, just attentive. "You look pale," he added, brushing his thumb lightly along my cheek. "Did you sleep okay?" I forced a small laugh, just adjusting to the house. His hand lingered on my face, warm, steady, the same hand that had written subject above my daily routine. "I told you," he said softly, "it takes time." Time for what? Dinner passed in strained normalcy. He spoke about work, about numbers, projections, meetings. His tone was calm, measured. There were no cracks in it, no hidden agitation. If I hadn't gone downstairs, I would have believed this version of him completely. At one point, his phone buzzed on the table. He flipped it face down instantly, a reflex. I noticed. He noticed that I noticed. "Spam," he said casually. I nodded. Later that evening, he stood up from the couch. "I have to check something downstairs," he said. My pulse spiked so sharply I felt lightheaded. "I'll come with you," I replied before I could stop myself. He paused, just a fraction too long. "It's dusty," he said evenly. "I don't mind." His eyes held mine, and something shifted. Not anger, assessment. He smiled slowly. "Another time." He walked toward the hallway. I listened as each lock clicked open. 1, 2, 3. The door closed behind him. The hum began, stronger than before. I stayed on the couch, staring at the blank television screen. I needed to know more. 15 minutes passed. 20. Then I heard it. A second sound beneath the hum. A metallic drag, like something heavy being moved across the floor. I stood up quietly and walked toward the hallway. My steps were silent on the wood. The basement door was closed, but light leaked faintly from the bottom. White light. I crouched slowly and pressed my ear against the surface. Voices. Not clear, but two distinct tones. Daniel's voice, and another, lower, muffled. My blood turned cold. There was someone else down there. I held my breath, straining to catch words. "Timing isn't precise yet. She trusts you. Don't rush." The second voice was calm, detached. "She's stable," Daniel replied. Stable. The word hit me like a slap. "She hasn't noticed anything," he continued. My stomach twisted. "She went near the door earlier," the other voice said. Silence. A pause long enough to stretch thin. "And?" Daniel asked. "You need to accelerate." My vision blurred. Accelerate what? I nearly lost my balance and had to press my hand against the wall to steady myself. Footsteps approached the staircase. I jumped back, heart slamming against my ribs, and rushed to the living room just as the basement door opened. Daniel stepped out first. Behind him was a man I had never seen before. Mid-40s, clean cut, neutral expression. He carried a black case in his hand. Our eyes met. For 1 second too long. "Oh," Daniel said lightly, as if surprised. "You're still awake." "I heard voices," I replied carefully. "This is Dr. Keller," Daniel said smoothly. "He's helping me catalog some of my uncle's medical equipment. He used to work with him." Dr. Keller offered a polite nod. His eyes scanned me quickly. Clinical. Assessing. "Nice to finally meet you," he said. Finally. The word echoed in my skull. Finally? As if he already knew who I was. I extended my hand automatically. His grip was firm, cool, professional. "You must be adjusting to the house," he said. "I am," I replied, holding his gaze. "Good," he answered. "Stability is important." The word again. Stability. Daniel walked him to the front door. They spoke quietly for a moment. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Dr. Keller's expression change. Not warmth, not friendliness. Approval. When Daniel returned inside, he locked the door and leaned against it briefly. "You startled me earlier," he said casually. "By the basement." "I didn't mean to," I replied. His eyes searched my face. "You know," he said slowly, "curiosity can create unnecessary stress. I'm just trying to understand my new home." He stepped closer. So close I could feel his breath against my skin. "You don't need to understand everything," he whispered. "You just need to trust me." My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Trust. The word felt dangerous now. He lifted his hand and brushed a strand of hair away from my face. "You do trust me, don't you?" There it was. Not affection, not reassurance. A test. And for the first time, I didn't know if the safest answer was yes. "Yes," I said. The lie left my mouth before I could measure it. His shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. He searched my face one more time, as if verifying the sincerity of my tone, then nodded. "Good," he replied softly. That night, he held me closer than usual. His arm was heavy across my waist, possessive, almost protective. I didn't sleep. I counted his breaths. Slow, even, controlled. At 2:13 a.m., they shifted. He was awake. I kept my eyes closed. He carefully lifted his arm from my body and slid out of bed. The mattress barely moved. He stood there for a second, watching me. I forced my breathing to remain deep and steady. Then he walked toward the hallway. I waited 10 seconds. 20. Then I opened my eyes. The bedroom was dark, but faint light bled in from under the door. Not the warm hallway light. White. I slipped out of bed and moved silently across the floor. My hands trembled, but my steps were steady. The hallway was empty. The basement door was open. Not fully, just enough to let the light escape. The hum was louder than ever. I moved slowly toward the opening and peered down the staircase. Daniel stood at the bottom, his back to me. Dr. Keller was there again. They were positioned near the steel door inside the white room, the smaller one, the locked one. "I don't like the acceleration," Daniel said quietly. "You don't have a choice," Keller replied. "You're already committed." Committed. My pulse pounded. "We need confirmation before Phase 2, Keller continued. Phase 2. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. I had seen that gesture before, when he was stressed. "She's emotionally dependent," he said. "That was the objective." Objective. My vision blurred with heat. "Dependency isn't permanence," Keller responded calmly. "You know that." Daniel's shoulders stiffened. "You assured me this would be controlled." "It is controlled." The steel door clicked, unlocked. My breath caught. Daniel hesitated. "Once we start, there's no reversal," Keller said. "I know." Start what? My hand pressed against the wall to steady myself. The steel door creaked open. I couldn't see inside from my angle, but I heard something. A faint beeping. Rhythmic. Alive. Daniel stepped inside first. Keller followed. The door remained slightly ajar. I don't remember deciding to move. My body just did. Step by step, I descended the staircase, keeping close to the wall to avoid casting a shadow. The white light burned my eyes as I reached the bottom. The main room was empty. The hospital bed untouched. The hum constant. I moved toward the steel door. Each heartbeat felt like it echoed off the walls. I reached the opening and looked inside. The room beyond was smaller, colder. In the center stood a large glass enclosure, like something from a laboratory. Inside it, I froze. A woman. She was lying on a narrow bed, unconscious. Her arms were at her sides. A thin tube connected to the machine I had seen earlier. The rhythmic beeping was coming from a monitor beside her. She wasn't restrained. She looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Her hair spilled over the pillow in soft waves, and she looked exactly like me. Not identical, but close enough to make my stomach drop. Same height, same build, similar hair color, similar features. I couldn't breathe. Daniel stood at the edge of the enclosure staring at her. His face wasn't cruel, it wasn't sad, it was focused. Keller adjusted something on the machine. "Vitals stable," he said. "We can proceed." Proceed? With what? My mind raced violently. Was she a patient? A test subject? A replacement? "She's not ready," Daniel said quietly. "She doesn't need to be ready," Keller replied. "You do." My hand slipped against the doorframe. A soft sound escaped my throat before I could stop it. Daniel's head snapped toward me. Our eyes met. And in that instant, I saw it. Not surprise, not guilt. Calculation. He moved toward me quickly. "Emma," he said sharply. I stepped back instinctively. "You weren't supposed to see this," he added. The words were calm, controlled, like he had rehearsed them. The woman inside the glass enclosure let out the faintest sound, a breath or a whisper, and the monitor's rhythm began to change. The beeping quickened, sharp, urgent. Dr. Keller turned toward the monitor instantly. "Her heart rate is spiking." Daniel didn't look away from me. "Emma," he said again, softer now, "you need to step back." "Who is she?" My voice came out thinner than I expected. He didn't answer. The woman inside the enclosure moved her fingers slightly. A twitch, small, but real. "She's waking," Keller said. "This isn't optimal." Optimal. I felt like the room was shrinking around me. "Answer me," I demanded, my voice breaking. "Who is she?" Daniel took one step closer. "She's part of the process." Process. Process of what? His jaw tightened. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me." For the first time since I met him, something flickered across his face. Not anger. Fear. The monitor's beeping became erratic. Keller adjusted the machine again. "If we delay now, the synchronization window closes." Synchronization. My mind scrambled to piece together the fragments. The file. My routine. Dependency. 90 days. Phase 2. The woman inside the glass enclosure opened her eyes. Slowly. They were unfocused at first, drifting upward toward the white ceiling. Then they shifted toward me and locked in place. My breath stopped. Her eyes were my color, not similar, the same. Confusion spread across her face as she tried to move her head. "Daniel," she whispered weakly. The sound shattered something inside me. She knew his name. He flinched, just slightly. "Sedation levels were supposed to hold," Keller muttered. The woman's gaze drifted between us. She looked at me, really looked, and her expression changed, from confusion to horror. "No," she breathed. My heart slammed against my ribs. "What is happening?" I demanded. Daniel exhaled slowly, like a man cornered by inevitability. "She was dying," he said. The words landed heavy and wrong. She still is, Keller corrected without emotion. Dying. I looked back at the woman. She didn't look dying. She looked terrified. What does that have to do with me? I asked. Daniel's eyes softened in a way that made my stomach twist. You were the match, he said quietly. The match. For what? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. For compatibility, neurological mapping, physical alignment, emotional structure. The room tilted. You chose me, I whispered. Yes. Not hesitation, not denial. Yes. Keller spoke again, clinical as ever. Her condition is degenerative. Without transfer, she has weeks. Transfer. The word echoed violently in my head. What transfer? I asked, my voice barely audible. Daniel's gaze didn't waver. Consciousness stabilization. The monitor beeped wildly now. The woman inside the enclosure tried to lift her head, but winced in pain. You promised, she whispered weakly to Daniel. You said it wouldn't hurt. My blood ran cold. He had promised her. He had married me. The pieces began sliding together in a pattern too horrifying to ignore. You don't need me, I said slowly. You need my body. Silence filled the room. Keller didn't correct me. Daniel didn't deny it. It's not that simple, he said finally. It's exactly that simple. He took another step forward. I fell in love with you too. The sentence felt obscene. You studied me, I said. You documented my routines. For synchronization, Keller interjected. Stop talking about me like I'm equipment, I snapped. The woman inside the enclosure began crying silently. Tears slid down her temples into her hair. I don't want to die, she whispered. The sound sliced through the sterile air. For a split second, our eyes met again, and I saw something terrifying. Recognition. Not because she looked like me, but because she felt like me. Daniel reached for my hand. I pulled away. It's the only way, he said. For who? I demanded. For her. Not for us. Not for love. For her. Keller checked his watch. We're losing the window. Window. Time. Schedule. 90 days. Everything was timed, planned, engineered. Daniel's voice lowered to a near whisper. I never wanted you to find out like this. But you were going to take it anyway, I replied. His silence was confirmation. The machine beside the enclosure emitted a sharp warning tone. Keller moved quickly. We have to initiate or abort. Abort. The word hung in the air. Daniel looked at the woman in the glass, then at me. His eyes were full of conflict, but not enough. Not enough to choose me. And that was when I understood something clearly. I had never been the wife. I had always been the solution. The warning tone grew sharper. Dr. Keller's fingers hovered over the control panel. We're seconds away from system collapse, he said evenly. Decide. Daniel looked at me, then at her. His chest rose and fell heavily. Abort, I said. My voice was steady now, stronger than I felt. Keller's eyes flicked toward Daniel, not me. If we abort, her deterioration accelerates. I don't care, I snapped. I didn't agree to this. You were evaluated, Keller replied coldly. You met every parameter. I'm not a parameter. Daniel's hands trembled slightly. Emma, If we don't, if you don't, I cut in. She dies? Silence. That was always the outcome, Keller said. We were trying to change it. The woman inside the enclosure began breathing faster. Panic filled her eyes. Daniel, she whispered again. He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something had shifted. Resolve. Proceed, he said quietly. The word detonated inside my skull. Keller pressed a sequence of buttons. The hum deepened, transforming into a low vibration that pulsed through the floor. No! I lunged toward the panel. Daniel grabbed me from behind, his arms locking around my torso. I can't lose her, he said into my ear. You never had me, I screamed. Inside the enclosure, a soft light flickered on above the woman's head. Thin wires descended from the ceiling, aligning toward her temples. The monitor stabilized into a fast, steady rhythm. Keller moved toward another console, one positioned beside an empty chair I hadn't noticed before. A chair identical to the one inside the glass, with wiring ready, waiting for me. Cold terror washed through my veins. Sit her down, Keller instructed calmly. Daniel tightened his grip. I'm sorry, he whispered. I twisted violently, driving my elbow backward with everything I had. It connected with his ribs. He loosened just enough. I broke free and shoved the rolling tray into Keller, sending instruments crashing across the floor. Alarms erupted. Red lights flashed across the white walls. The hum fractured into erratic surges. Keller cursed under his breath and lunged for the controls. I grabbed the nearest object, a metal stand, and swung it toward the main machine. It struck hard. Sparks exploded from the panel. The enclosure lights flickered violently. Inside, the woman cried out as the wires recoiled upward. Stop! Daniel shouted. But I didn't. I swung again. The vibration beneath my feet faltered. The monitor's rhythm spiked into chaos. Keller slammed his hand against a reset switch. Nothing happened. Smoke began seeping from the damaged panel. System failure, Keller muttered. We're losing containment. The glass enclosure emitted a sharp crack. A thin fracture spread across its surface. Daniel stared at it in horror. Stabilize it, he demanded. It's too late. Another crack. Louder. The woman inside gasped, clutching at her chest. I didn't think. I moved. I rushed toward the enclosure just as the glass shattered outward. Fragments scattered across the floor. She collapsed forward into my arms. Her body was warm, weak, real. Up close, she looked less like my reflection and more like a fragile version of myself. Her breathing was shallow. Stay with me, I whispered instinctively. Daniel stood frozen, staring at us. This wasn't supposed to happen, he said. No, I replied through clenched teeth. It wasn't. Smoke thickened around us as sparks continued to spit from the damaged system. Keller backed toward the stairs. We need to evacuate. The woman's fingers curled weakly into my sleeve. Please, she whispered. Don't let me. Her voice broke. Daniel stepped forward at last. I can fix this, he insisted. There's nothing left to fix, I said. The machine behind us emitted one final shriek of feedback. Then the lights cut out. Darkness swallowed the room. The hum died. All that remained was the faint sound of her breathing against my shoulder, and Daniel's silence in the black. Emergency lights flickered on a second later, casting everything in a dim red glow. Smoke drifted toward the ceiling in slow, ghostly spirals. The woman in my arms coughed weakly. "She needs oxygen," Keller said sharply from the staircase. The system was regulating her vitals. Daniel moved closer, kneeling beside us. His hands hovered uncertainly over her shoulders, as if afraid to touch her now that the glass was gone. "She won't survive long without stabilization," Keller continued. "You've accelerated her failure." I looked up at him. "She's not equipment." Keller's face hardened. "Emotion won't change biology." Daniel swallowed hard. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," Keller replied. "That's why we designed this." Designed? Like it was a blueprint. Like I was a component. The woman's breathing grew more strained. Each inhale sounded thinner than the last. I felt her grip weaken against my sleeve. "Emma," Daniel said quietly. I didn't look at him. "We need to get her upstairs," I said. "Call an ambulance." Keller shook his head immediately. "Impossible." "Why?" I snapped. "Because no hospital will understand what's been done to her." The words hung heavy. What's been done? "Then explain it," I demanded. "It's not recognized science," Keller replied. "It's experimental, unapproved, illegal." The implication was clear. Daniel ran a shaking hand through his hair again. "I didn't want this," he said. "You built it," I replied. "For her," he whispered. The woman's eyes fluttered open again. They searched the room weakly before settling on Daniel. "I don't want her to die for me," she said faintly. The sentence silenced all of us. Daniel's face broke. "It was never about sacrifice," he insisted. "That's exactly what it was," I said. Her fingers slid from my sleeve and fell against the concrete floor. Her pulse under my hand was faint. Too faint. Keller glanced toward the damaged machines. "If we reconnect partial power, we might stabilize her temporarily." "With what?" I asked. "The backup generator." "Where?" "Garage." Daniel stood abruptly. "I'll get it." I shifted her carefully into his arms. For a second, we both held her weight. It felt like holding something fragile enough to disappear. Daniel carried her toward the stairs while Keller rushed ahead. I followed. Each step felt heavier than the last. Upstairs, the house looked unchanged. Quiet. Peaceful. Normal. The contrast made my stomach twist. Daniel laid her gently on the living room couch. Keller disappeared toward the garage. I knelt beside her. Her skin felt cooler now, her breathing shallow and uneven. "Stay with me," I whispered again. Her gaze drifted toward mine. "You look like me," she murmured faintly. "No," I said softly. "You look like you." A faint smile touched her lips. Daniel stood a few feet away, helpless. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked small. Not controlled, not calculating. Small. The sound of the generator sputtering to life echoed from outside. Lights flickered briefly. Keller rushed back inside, carrying cables. "We don't have long," he said. He began connecting equipment hastily near the couch. Portable monitors, battery packs, improvised stabilization. The machine beeped weakly as it detected her pulse. It was irregular, dangerously so. Daniel crouched beside her and took her hand. "I'm here," he said. She turned her head slightly toward him. "I know," she whispered. And then she looked at me. "Thank you," she breathed. "For what?" I asked, my throat tight. "For stopping it." The monitor gave a long, wavering tone. Daniel's face drained of color. Keller adjusted the wires frantically. "Come on," he muttered. But the line on the screen began to flatten. Slowly. Mercilessly. Daniel squeezed her hand tighter. "Stay with me," he pleaded. Her eyes remained on his. Not mine. His. The line on the monitor stretched into a single, unbroken sound. And didn't change. The sound didn't stop. It held. Long. Unforgiving. Daniel stared at the monitor as if refusing to understand what it meant. "Do something," he said to Keller. Keller checked the connections again, then looked at Daniel. "There's no electrical activity." "No," Daniel whispered. "No, she was stable. She was responding." "She was sustained," Keller corrected. "Not healed." The word echoed in the room. Sustained. Like life had been borrowed time. Daniel's hand was still wrapped around hers. His thumb moved slightly, as if waiting for her to squeeze back. She didn't. The red emergency glow felt harsher now, exposing everything. Exposing him. Slowly, carefully, Daniel lowered his forehead to her hand. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Keller stood up. "We need to dismantle everything," he said quietly. "Immediately." Daniel didn't move. "If this is discovered..." "She's dead," I cut in. "That's what's discovered." Keller's jaw tightened. "You don't understand the implications." I stood up slowly. "No," I said. "You don't." The house felt different now. Not threatening. Not mysterious. Just hollow. Daniel finally lifted his head. His eyes were red, but dry. "This wasn't supposed to be the outcome," he said. "You don't get to control outcomes," I replied. He looked at me then. Really looked. Not as a subject. Not as a match. As a person he had underestimated. "I loved her," he said. "I know. And I loved you." The sentence landed weakly between us. "Love doesn't design replacements," I answered. Silence stretched. Keller moved toward the basement door. "We need to clear the lower level before morning." Daniel stood slowly. He looked torn, between staying beside her body and following Keller's instructions. That instinct to fix, to control, to contain. It was still there, even now. He stepped toward me. "I never meant to hurt you." "You married me to use me," I said evenly. "I married you because you were the only chance she had. That's not love. That's desperation." His shoulders sagged. The truth settled heavy between us. Outside, distant sirens echoed somewhere far off in the city. Unrelated. Ordinary life continuing. Daniel looked toward the window briefly, then back at me. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I glanced at the woman on the couch. She looked peaceful again. But this time, it wasn't sedation. It was final. "I'm going to call an ambulance," I said. Keller turned sharply. "That would be a mistake." "For who?" I asked calmly. "For all of us." I picked up my phone from the kitchen counter. Daniel didn't try to stop me. That was the moment I understood something else. He had lost more than her. He had lost control. I dialed. My voice was steady as I gave the address. Medical emergency, unresponsive female, possible cardiac failure. I didn't mention consciousness transfer. I didn't mention experimental machines. Some truths would surface on their own. When I ended the call, the house felt quieter than it ever had. Daniel stood in the middle of the living room, looking at the life he had tried to engineer. Keller walked slowly back toward the basement, and I stood between them. Not as a solution, not as a substitute, but as the only person in the room who had chosen something freely. In the distance, the sirens grew louder. The sirens stopped in front of the house. Blue light flashed across the walls. Daniel didn't move. Keller did. He turned sharply toward the hallway. "We don't have time to sanitize everything." "You should leave," I said to him. He studied me for a moment, calculating risk. Then he looked at Daniel. "This is your responsibility now." Daniel didn't respond. Keller grabbed his black case and moved quickly toward the back entrance instead of the front door. He disappeared into the darkness without another word. A hard knock struck the front door. "Emergency services!" I walked forward and opened it. 2 paramedics stepped inside, followed by a police officer. Their eyes moved quickly, trained, efficient. "Where is she?" one of them asked. "In here," I said. They moved toward the couch immediately. Daniel stepped back as they began assessing her, checking pulse, pupils, airway. One of them looked at the monitor still attached beside her. "What equipment is this?" he asked. "Old medical device," Daniel answered faintly. The paramedic frowned, but didn't press yet. After a short, professional exchange of glances, one of them exhaled. "Time of death," he said quietly to his partner. The words sounded official, real, final. The police officer stepped closer to me. "Ma'am, what happened?" I didn't hesitate. "She was being kept downstairs," I said. Daniel's head lifted slowly. "In the basement," I continued. "There's equipment, machines. I don't know what all of it does." The officer's expression changed. "Kept?" he repeated. "Yes." Daniel finally spoke. "It's not what it sounds like." The officer looked at him. "Then explain it." Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. There was no explanation that didn't sound insane. The paramedics began preparing her body for transport. One of them glanced toward the hallway. "Basement?" he asked. "Yes," I said. The officer gestured toward another unit outside. Within minutes, more footsteps filled the house. Heavy boots, radios crackling. They moved toward the basement door. The reinforced locks didn't go unnoticed. One officer whistled under his breath. "What exactly were you running down there?" he muttered. Daniel stood motionless. I watched him carefully. For anger, for betrayal, for rage toward me. But what I saw instead was something else. Defeat. As officers descended into the white room below, the house seemed to exhale. The secret was no longer hidden. The hum was gone. The illusion was gone. One of the officers returned upstairs after several minutes. "You need to come down and see this," he said to his partner. Then he looked at Daniel. "And you need to come with us." Daniel's eyes met mine one last time before they placed him in handcuffs. Not violently, not dramatically, just procedure. He didn't resist. As they led him toward the door, he paused briefly in front of me. "I did love you," he said quietly. I held his gaze. "Maybe," I replied, "but not enough." He nodded once. Then they guided him outside into the flashing lights. The front door closed behind them. Silence settled over the house again, but this time it wasn't heavy with secrets. It was empty. Paramedics carried her out on a stretcher moments later. Covered, anonymous now, the resemblance between us no longer visible. Just a body leaving a house that was never meant to hold her. I stood alone in the living room, the couch still indented where she had been, the faint smell of smoke lingering in the air. Upstairs, our bedroom waited, the key still resting on the dresser where I had found it. I walked slowly toward the hallway, past the basement door now standing open, bright white light spilling up the stairs as investigators moved through what remained of Daniel's design. I didn't look down. I didn't need to anymore. I continued past it, upstairs, into the room where I had once felt chosen. I picked up the key. It felt lighter now, useless. I set it back down, and for the first time since I had walked into this house as a bride, I understood something clearly. I hadn't married a monster. I had married a man who believed love gave him permission to play God, and I was the only one who survived it. Morning light entered the bedroom slowly, soft, ordinary, indifferent. I hadn't slept. Downstairs, voices moved in controlled patterns. Investigators documenting, photographing, labeling what used to be a secret as evidence. Every sound felt procedural, measured. By noon, the house no longer felt like ours. It felt like a scene. An officer approached me in the kitchen. "We'll need a formal statement," he said gently. I nodded. He sat across from me with a recorder placed between us. "When did you first become aware of the basement equipment?" "Yesterday," I answered. "Did you consent to any medical procedures?" "No." "Were you ever physically harmed?" The question lingered. "No," I said finally. "Not physically." He studied me briefly, understanding more than I said. "Did he ever threaten you?" "No." That was the strangest part. There had been no threats, no shouting, no violence, just planning, careful, calculated planning. After 2 hours of questions, they allowed me to pack a small bag. The house was now sealed, pending investigation. I walked through each room slowly. The kitchen where we had eaten dinner like newlyweds. The hallway where I had once paused, unsure. The basement door now propped open, lights blazing below as technicians dismantled what remained. I didn't look down. I didn't need to. Upstairs, I opened the closet. My wedding dress hung inside its garment bag, untouched, pure. I stared at it for a long moment before zipping the bag closed again. Some illusions deserved to stay folded. By evening, the house was dark again, empty. I stepped outside carrying my bag. A patrol car still idled nearby. Neighbors watched discreetly from behind curtains. Whispers had already begun. I didn't care. I slid into the back seat of the car that would take me to a temporary hotel. As we drove away, I looked back once. The windows reflected only the fading sky. No white light, no hum, just brick and shadow. Daniel was being processed downtown. Attempted unlawful medical experimentation. Conspiracy. Fraud. The charges would multiply as investigators examined Keller's background. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel revenge. I felt something quieter. Clarity. At the hotel, the room smelled like industrial detergent and unfamiliar sheets. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed my body to shake. Not from fear, from release. My phone buzzed with unknown numbers. Reporters, probably. I turned it off. I lay back and stared at the ceiling. For weeks, I had wondered what I had done to deserve distance in his eyes. What I could improve. How I could love better. Now I understood. It had never been about me lacking anything. I had been complete from the start. That was why I was chosen. Not as a wife, as a vessel. Tears slid silently into my hair. Not for him. Not even for her. But for the version of myself who had walked into that house believing love was simple. Days passed in interviews and paperwork. I learned her name, Clara. She had a rare neurological disorder, progressive, terminal. Daniel had met her years before. He had promised her time. He had promised her survival. And when medicine couldn't give it, he tried to build it. Investigators told me the synchronization theory had no verified success. It was obsession disguised as science. Keller had lost his medical license years ago. Daniel had funded everything, sold assets, liquidated accounts, married strategically. Each revelation landed without shock. I had already seen the truth in that white room. A week later, I stood outside the courthouse for the preliminary hearing. Reporters called my name. I didn't stop. Inside, Daniel glanced at me once as he was led past. There was no anger in his eyes, only exhaustion, and maybe, finally, understanding. He had tried to save one woman by sacrificing another, and in the end, he lost both. When I walked back into the open air, the world felt wider, uncontrolled, unengineered, mine. I breathed in slowly. For the first time in months, the air didn't hum.